I love Andy's art. You have to, from afar, it looks like it's real. And then you get closer and the illusion breaks, but yet the detail is incredible. You can stand and stare at one of his paintings for hours and just look at all the tiny little details. Welcome, Andy, to Ed Paschke Art Center.
Thank you guys for those kind words, and you might take that applause back after you hear me talk. Well, thank you for all coming out on this rather frigid day. But can you imagine what it's like doing a painting in this kind of weather? I can't either. I usually can stop at about 40 degrees. Anything further than that is just impossible. It just affects the paint and affects me. So last year my mother sent me some report cards from my elementary school days, 3rd, 4th grade. And they read something like this: reading C, writing C, math C, grammar C, spelling C minus. Proud parents of an average student. And in the bottom of the comment section on 2 of the cards was the remark: Andy is a nice boy and gets along with his fellow classmates, but spends way too much time looking out the windows. Now fast forward to my last year at grad school at SAIC. My primary advisor was Ted Hawkins, a man who had a reputation for being direct and brutally honest. I remember during our last critique, he was just shaking his head. And I think the words were sloppy, unclear, unambitious. He even suggested that I don't graduate. That's how confused I was. And at the time I had a large studio away from campus. And he turned and said, "What about this? Why don't you look out your windows?" What I knew in 4th grade, huh? So the first people to really paint outside on site were the Impressionists. And other than that, I really have nothing in common. They wanted light to break down appearances, not a lot of detail. I desire solidity, and most important, specificity. I want a tree that's a maple to look like a maple. I want an oak tree to look like an oak. I want someone to know that those floors are maple. So to be very specific is very important to me. It's not just detail, but it's specificity. My paintings are more about sustained observation. They take about 2 or 3 months to complete, if I can do that as well. Sometimes I just am unable to complete a painting. And the Impressionists, like, of course, the impression, the glance. They saw light as movement, the flickering light and color. I like light to show stillness and permanence. They painted things in a rather shimmering light, where I'm interested in light on things. I like what light illuminates. The only Impressionist who refused to paint outdoors was Degas, who said, "Painting is not a sport." I would disagree with that. I would rather call it an extreme sport. Because working outside, pretty much everything is working against you, and there's so many things that are out of your control. The first would be the wind. These are rather large paintings for working on site, and when the wind is over 20 miles an hour, it's just impossible to keep it on the easel. It's impossible for the whole easel not to fall over, which it has many times. I often will bring 2 bricks to a site and hide them to weigh down the back of the easel so it doesn't just flip over. And for the most part, it works. The second is the changing weather. That's the first thing I do every day is look at the 10-day forecast, and then the day forecast, the hourly, and they're usually wrong. So I have to use my own site as well. But Tom Skilling is basically my go-to guy. He seems to be the most accurate. But still, that's only about 70% of the chance. Then there's the changing seasons. spring and fall are the most difficult times to complete a painting because of the rapidly changing seasons. I can always get a painting done in the summertime, but often I have to abandon the paintings that I started in the spring and fall. I did start a painting on Lake Street Bridge once, a couple of years ago. I started it in March, and it was so cold. I was in full parka, gloves, hat, scarf, big boots, and when I finished the painting, I was in a t-shirt. So it ended in about, I think, May then, so it was kind of an interesting change in weather. And then I have to ask myself, will the site change? I was working at the Portland Street Bridge this past spring, working where they had demolished the old Finkel foundry. And it was a beautiful site. I got a painting stretched and got about 6 weeks into the project, when all of a sudden some heavy machinery was moved into the site. And they decided to re-excavate the basements, and they cut down all the beautiful telephone poles that I was painting. So I got a good start on it, but I had to abandon it. And that happens often. And then I have to ask myself, can I physically get to the site? Many times I have to rope my canvas and easel over a fence before I jump over, and it's difficult when the painting is wet and wind is around, and it can be a little tricky sometimes. And then, with these paintings, I had to ask myself, will the object be purchased? These paintings were done in a place called Salvage One, which I'm sure you all know about. They're very kind. They let me go and paint there whenever I want, even when they're not open. And one day when I was working on this bathtub, there was a sticker on it saying, "On hold." So I had to kind of rush to try to work in the bathtub. I did come one day and it was gone. So you can kind of see how, all the flooring I didn't complete. But I kind of like it the way it is. It didn't really bother me. But after that, I was doing a painting of these 15 black bar stools. And it was quite beautiful. It was wonderful light in Salvage One. And one day, there was 13 bar stools. And so I could manage that. I just moved some to where they had disappeared. And so I continued to work. And then one day, a woman came in towards the end of the painting and bought 8 stools. And so I had to abandon that painting. And then finally, do I need to get permission? Kind of an odd thing to think about, trying to make a painting. But it's happened often. And the first time was when I had this grand idea of doing a series of paintings in the subway stations. I first went down to the Division Street stop, Blue Line, and was very excited. Set up my easel, started the drawing, and about 10 minutes later, I was tapped on the shoulder, and the security guard said, "You have to leave." And so that was a bit depressing. But then my friend, the all-powerful Chuck Thoreau, came to the rescue. And he has a lot of connections in the city, and he arranged a meeting with the head muckety-mucks of CTA and all their lawyers. And we had a meeting at their headquarters downtown. And it didn't last long. We just stated our case, and they asked some questions, and they basically said, "We'll get back to you." So about 6 weeks later, they gave me this thing here, which is called a right of entry and license agreement. Apparently no one's asked to paint the subway stations before, so this was kind of a uncharted territory. So some of the things that they had to say in this right of entry and license agreement. This right of entry and license agreement, called the agreement, was made this 15th day of December 2010 by and between the Chicago Transit Authority and Andy Paczos, the producer, a fine arts painter. And then it goes on to say, whereas, therefore, in consideration of all mutual promises contained in this agreement, parties agree as follows. And then it goes down to right of entry, the scope of the license, conduct and transit system and prohibited activities, such as no painting will be allowed during rush hour. The producer will not act or speak in a lewd or harassing manner to any CTA customers or employees. The producer will remain aware of his surroundings and not inch backward to get a better view of an overall object. It's better. And the producer may have access to the restroom facilities, but I just did what everyone else did. You know what I mean? And then there's the payment of fares and compensation. In consideration of the rights and licenses granted by the CTA and pursuant to this agreement, the producer agrees to pay the appropriate CTA fare for each visit upon signing this agreement to secure the performance of the producer's obligations hereunder. But it was kind of nice as I continued to work. The guards all are the people in the payment booths all just kind of waved me through, and that was kind of a nice way of saving $5. And let's see what else is this. All kinds of stuff. You can see it's about a 10-page document. Then there's this thing called force majeure.
Force majeure.
A C student. Either party's failure to perform any term or condition of this agreement as a result of conditions beyond its control, such as, but not limited to, terrorist threats or acts, war, strikes, fires, floods, acts of God, power failures, or damage or destruction of any kind shall not be deemed a breach of this agreement. So it goes on, and then the last page is the mandatory $3 million insurance policy. But thanks to the Hyde Park Art Center and Chuck Thoreau, they put me under their policy, so I didn't have to pay that. What? Chuck also helped me out with the Logan Center for the Arts building at the University of Chicago. Those are the 3 paintings I did there. I also needed to get permission. Chuck arranged a visit with the director, and once again we needed the $3 million insurance policy. And so that all kind of worked out. Although, when I was painting in the subways, I almost kind of wish that they had said no, because it was a really miserable place to work. The paintings, some of them were good, but just the smell, the wind from the trains, the crazy people I would meet, and having to take 2 or 3 stops to get to the location. So it was rather tough. But and so yes, getting permission. This painting here that I did at the Mars Global Headquarters on Goose Island, they own this parking lot. And I was very excited when I found this site and came the first day with my easel and instantly got shut down by the security guard, or the security patrol that patrols the parking lot. And this is how funny things happen. It was a kid, probably 21 years old, and he just said, "I can't be here. Cars might hit you." Standing here. Like a car would just not see him, and there was just no reason. And he said, "Well, if you stand here on the grass, you could probably work. There's no problem. You just can't stand in the parking lot." And that wasn't going to work. I said, "I've got to stand here, not there." He didn't seem to quite get that. But I went into this building here, which is the UNI Labs. They rented this area, the parking lot, and I asked them permission, and they said, "No problem." But the security guard then came up to me and said, "I'm sorry, but we own the property, they just rent it." So, it's just one of those things about getting permission to make art.
How'd you do it?
That's right. Well, oddly enough, we came to an agreement. He said, "You can work here, but only on the weekends when no one's driving in the parking lot." So I became a weekend painter. And I didn't think I could finish the painting in time, but it's funny that summer, it seemed like every weekend was beautiful weather. So I was able to do it, and that's that. But sometimes even Chuck can't help me out. I tried to do a painting in the Art Institute in the Modern Wing, and he contacted James Rondo, who then contacted me and said, "We don't like to encourage painting in the museum." That's true. And then there's the Cultural Center. I found a great place to paint on the 5th floor, overlooking the backside of the Tiffany Dome. I thought surely I could paint here, but I had to get permission. And the director said no, that I might interfere with people walking by. And so that got that got stopped immediately as well. And it's funny because on the outside of the building there's a sign saying, "Welcome to the Chicago Cultural Center, free and open to everyone." Except me. And then there's the wonderful experience of how people react to seeing a painter with an easel doing a painting outside. There's basically three ways. First, there's a group that just walk by me as I'm invisible and they don't even see me. Then there's the people that just walk right up and stick their face in my painting and go, "Wow, looks just like a photograph." And they're usually teenagers, but they just have no inhibitions about just walking right up. And then there's the third kind, which I really like. It's the people that walk by, and then as they walk by me, they do that quarter turn back like that. And when I see that, I always stop and encourage them to come up and take a closer look. I ask, I tell them to ask me any questions, and they always have a very nice response. Thank you for sharing. And then sometimes people will stop and actually watch me paint. And that kind of irritates me a little bit. But the good thing is that because my process is so boring, it moves so slowly that usually after about a minute or two, they just move on. And it's funny, under the Kennedy Expressway, I worked on that painting this summer. And a little girl came up to me with her mother, and she was very excited. She looked up at me and said, "Can I try?" And her mother was just appalled. "Oh, no, don't bother." And of course I said, "Sure, you can try." And I said, "What's your favorite color?" And she said, "Red." So I loaded her brush up with red and I gave it to her, and she just started going to town. But it was in the sidewalk area. I hadn't really completed it yet, so I knew that it wasn't going to be cause any damage to the painting.
That's good.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about my process, how I make these paintings. And it first starts with finding a location. I don't really have any strict methodology to it, but I'm always looking, always. And I carry this device here, usually wherever I go. I call it cardboard viewfinder. You just kind of do your adjustments like this. It's horizontal, vertical, and so you're always just kind of panning like this, and then there comes a moment where you say, stop. All right, that's it. But this is generally just used to determine the size of the canvas. That's all. But it's always with me. So when something does finally strike me, I usually don't stay long at the site because I like to just get a glimpse of what might be interesting me. I like the examination and the discovery to come out in the process of making the painting, not instantly. I don't like to notice everything right away. So when I do find a site then, I use this device, which is much after years of research and development, and 2 patents pending. I use this to determine the size of the canvas as well, and then I use this grid and then put the grid on the canvas. And that's generally how I start. But it's very tricky once I'm out there to find exactly where I hold it. And if my head turns a little bit, it's wrong. So I just have to nail it right away. And it's very difficult to come back and forth. I start by just making small little dots on the canvas. And then bring this back up, and then I'll kind of essentially locate certain things where it becomes easier and easier with each dot. And then I start making lines and connecting the dots. But it does take a while to get the drawing done. I don't do preparatory drawings. I draw right on the linen, which is linen, not canvas. And the drawing has to be extremely accurate, not really detailed, but it's very important for me to have this end here. And I wanted the Sears tower to be right there. So anything in between, if certain things aren't right, it all gets thrown off. And so if the drawing's not accurate, the whole painting kind of falls apart. once I start painting, I always start with the sky, because it basically determines the weather of the painting. And so, and I have to generally get that in one session, because clouds generally don't repeat themselves, if I do have clouds. But even, the light is very tricky, it's never the same. And so, that's the beginning of the painting. And then there's that wonderful time of the middle of the painting, where things start to take form, and you start to see and things become realized. And that's kind of the most exciting part of the painting process for me. But then there's the end, where things are going so slow that when I come back after a 4-hour session, I can't even tell what I've done. And so it's kind of frustrating at the end. And there's never really a spot or a time towards the end where I go, finished. It's usually more like, enough. And so you stop. And that's how it works. So, are there any questions? Yes?
You don't use photography to sort of map the sites you choose?
No. I mean, that's what this thing helps me just to. I mean, again, the edges of the painting are very important to me, but I do not use photography. And one thing I sometimes tell myself actually is that when I find a spot to paint, I want to make sure that it wouldn't look interesting if a photographer was to take a picture of the spot. I want it to be an interesting painting, but if my friend who's a photographer, Dimitri, he would sometimes go and take a shot of where I'm painting, and it just doesn't look interesting at all. And in the painting, a certain magic comes out, and it's a very concentrated way of looking that the camera doesn't really afford, I think.
You ever finish these at home?
No.
So I'll put it.
I like to call it on-site. But plein air, outside, yes. No.
You haven't.
I mean, I'm tempted to sometimes do it, but, even in the Kennedy Expressway painting, some of the lines on Ashland Avenue weren't finished, and I could clearly do that in my studio, but it's just no point. It wouldn't make the painting any better.
You have tremendous discipline.
In some respects.
Well,
not in all.
The lighting change. I mean, there's just so much changes.
Yes, but that's part of the excitement. It's not all things that are working against me. If it wasn't a fight, I don't think it would be worthwhile doing.
Understood.
Yeah.
How do you decide on the subject matter?
Well, again, I don't really have any methodology. It's just kind of pure instinct, really.
It's your eye or your...
Yeah. It comes very slowly. I'm always looking, whether I'm driving, riding a bike, walking, and carrying on that little device. And sometimes it doesn't really strike me as a painting until I do use the viewfinder. And that's when I because there's just so much to look at. If you're looking at this vast panorama, you have to isolate it into a painting, So, yes?
Were there any painters who inspired you to do this kind of...
Well, I don't know. When I was a little boy, I used to copy Albert Bierstadt paintings from a book. And I was always interested in Hopper. But as far as on-site painters, there's not a lot of them out there. There's Rax Downs in New York, who paints just like me. The only difference is about $200,000 a painting. And probably the best living painter, I think, in the world right now is Antonio Lopez Garcia, who is a painter who lives in Madrid. He's very old right now, so when he dies, it's going to be a great loss.
But you'll move up a notch.
Yes, Mr. Crow.
Do you have any particular element you like to paint the most, like trees or reflections or the ground, the sky?
No. I mean, I do like, some things are more exciting than others. I mean, when, painting this little concrete thing here, I would watch the sun constantly, and it would just start to creep and creep and creep, and all of a sudden it would just hit this edge. And I could, as I'm painting it, I would just kind of watch it travel, and then it stops. And certain things, like even the sign, I didn't recognize its beauty when I first started the painting. But, the back side of the sign, which is obviously always more interesting than the front side. The front side is usually telling me what not to do. But, just the weird reflections in this, and this color here is coming from here. But, I don't know. I like, no, there's nothing in particular. Yes.
Do you ever decide to leave something out?
Yes, you caught me. What can I use? I do. I never stage anything, but yes, I do decide to at times eliminate certain things. What am I thinking?
Well, you deal with nature and people. You have to take them out.
So not often.
No, not often. And I used to feel real strict about it. But I decided that some things just aren't necessary. Then why paint them?
People.
But what?
Like people.
Why don't I paint people?
No, I said like people.
Oh, but why don't I paint people?
That's something you said.
No,
Yeah.
I don't know, because of course there's always people in my paintings. When I was doing this painting here, I was actually looking through a fence, and there were people in the pool. You know, there was a lifeguard sitting in a chair. But I always thought if I painted people that it would kind of really freeze the painting. And it would almost seem like it was out of a Twilight Zone episode or something like that. But just someone stopping like... And so yes, Tim Anderson.
You ever use medium?
What's that?
Painting medium that
I use
for flow.
turpentine and linseed oil mixed with the paintings. I like turpentine more than paint thinner because it stinks a lot more, and I love that smell ever since I was a little boy.
What do you prime the linen with?
I prime the linen with a clear sizing called PVA, which is polyvinyl acetate. And that keeps the color of the linen brown, which I really like. It makes it much easier to paint. It makes the colors pop a bit more. A real slippery surface, and I like the way linen has a bit of a bite to it, where the paint just, you have to really kind of work the paint. It's a little more expensive, but it's definitely worth it. Yes?
Thanks for the talk, Andy. I'm curious, what interested you about painting in a condition where you give so much control to the externals, like the weather, or if the landscape changes while you're painting, you can determine when you finish the painting or not? What drew you to that kind of context?
Well, it came to me. I didn't really come to it. Again, it's just part of the nature of the business. About probably 30% of the paintings I start, I have to abandon. But again, that's kind of it's part of the challenge of it too, and I embrace it. Yes.
When you were painting outside, did you start initially painting smaller, or did you always
No,
paint
they were
large?
always. Well,
Outside.
yes, there's a limitation to the size I can paint. When I'm painting because of the wind mostly. But when I'm painting inside, I can go a lot larger. Some of the ones aren't here right now, but I really do love. First of all, I never used to paint inside, but outside in the wintertime, it's just physically impossible. And so why not? Look out your window. The Logan's painting over there was a great example of kind of interior, exterior. Actually, all those Logan paintings, and so yeah. I think we're good. So
Any other questions? One more
please.
question, anyone?
That isn't my question.
What's the longest series you ever did? What series took you the longest?
Out in the subway. I was there for 2 years. All right. Well, thank you very much.
So yes, one more round of applause, please.